from and exchange views with experts in relation to upcoming revision of the Toy Safety Directive. This revision aims to protect children better against risk in toys, particularly from chemicals, and at the same time to strengthen the single market for toys. So, I propose at first our experts will take the floor for maximum 8 minutes each. So our time is limited, and then members of the Parliament will raise questions, maximum 1 minute each, and one speaker for one political group. Welcome. So, and then our experts will respond to those questions, but altogether just 9 minutes for all the experts. So, I would like to ask Mr. Klaus Jürgensen, expert from ANAC, the European Consumer Voice in Standardization, to take the floor for 8 minutes, please.
Thank you very much.
Mike.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me here to this public hearing. It's a very important issue. I am from the Danish Consumer Council, and today I'm representing ANIC. And if you can change to the second slide, please. This is the agenda of today. I will talk a little bit about ANIC, just so you know who we are. But then I will also talk about different issues in the toys regulation. Next slide, please. So this is just to show you what ANIC is all about. We're a standardization organization, and we're all the European consumers' voice in standardization. I won't go into detail with this, but one of the main issues of ANIC is to focus on child safety and toy safety. We sit on different safety expert groups and sub-chemical groups, and we're also, of course, involved in the toys standardization process. Next slide, please. So what we basically want to do is to ensure that the European standardization and legislation provides the best protection available for children, because they are the most vulnerable people that we have here on Earth. We want to protect them even more than we do the adults. Of course, we have to protect the adults, but the children are more vulnerable, and we have to protect them as much as we can. They are still developing, and we need to protect them because they evolve and are developing, and any chemicals that they come into contact will potentially harm their development. Next slide, please. So on this slide, I've put down a few of the examples of what we have found in the Danish Consumer Councils. We test toys maybe 3-4 times a year, and basically we always find unwanted chemicals in toys, but we always find toys without unwanted chemicals. So this shows that it is actually impossible to do this. Also, I want to add that children are not only exposed to chemicals from toys, but they're also exposed from other products that they are surrounded with. We did a big test this spring that showed that 60% of 120 products for children contain chemicals of concern. And a recent study of personal care products from children in Denmark, published in Contact Dermatitis, showed that about 54% of all the cosmetics and makeup for children contain perfume. And of course, this is also something that's addressed in the toys legislation. So what we're saying is that we need to not only look at the chemicals in toys, but also at the chemicals that children are exposed to from other products. And if you go into a toy store, you'll probably find makeup and face paint for children as well. Thank you. Next slide. But to put it shortly, we're very satisfied with the regulation that is proposed. We're very pleased that it's going to be a regulation, and also I think I speak for the whole NGO community that we are very, very pleased that it has now included chemicals that can affect the endocrine system. Endocrine disrupting chemicals have been an issue for many years, and it's very good to see that the Commission is actually acting on this and including this into the protection of children. It's very pleasing to see that all substances that are now banned for children under 3 years of age will be banned in all toys. So this is also a positive thing. There's also a proposal to ban bisphenol A. This is also something we like, but we're also asking, what about the other bisphenols? Shouldn't we also ban them? We like to have, we're very supportive of the comitology procedures that have been set in place, and we like the fact that the companies have to make sure that the safety assessment also includes exposure scenarios from other scenarios. Of course, there are limited derogations to be allowed if ECHA approves and so on, but we propose that it should only be maximum of 3 years, and after 3 years we hope that maybe the company that has got the derogation can come and show they've tried to get rid of this chemical, or somehow show that it's still impossible, so they need to reapply. So derogation should only be time limited. And finally, I would also like to say that it's very good to see that environmental information should be available in a digital product passport. Next slide, please. And the digital passport is, of course, important. We see it as a very good supplement to the marking on the toy. But a point that we want to stress is that it should be very easy for the consumers to assess this digital passport. And of course, this means that it should be free, and it should also contain the needed information for the consumers. We're a bit concerned about when it is to be implemented. It's not really clear if it's right away after the regulation goes into enforcement, but the sooner the better that the digital passport can be in place, the better for consumers. Also, we have, I mentioned this about the derogations, and also we think that the nitrosamines that are now being banned in some toys should be banned in all toys. And I would like to mention here a special Danish position. We've been asking for labeling requirements in Denmark for many years, and actually some companies in Denmark are now labeling chemical toys, such as slime and also bubble baths, I think it's called. And so labeling would enable consumers to make a choice out in the stores to whether or not they want to be exposed to these chemicals. Next slide, please. So connected toys is also mentioned in the legislation, but is it good enough? And it says something about that we have to wait because this is being regulated in other legislation from the EU. But we think it's sort of similar to the chemicals issue. There is a risk, and it's not really in place in the other legislation. Some of it is not even finalized yet. So we think we could also include the connectivity of toys into the toys legislation as well. Next slide, please. And also, it says in the regulation that we have to focus on noise levels, but it's not really mentioned at what limit it is, and we prefer to have the limits set in the in the legislation instead of having it done by the standards. So please include also noise levels in the legislation. We're very supportive of on the next slide, we're very supportive of the new powers that have been granted to the European Commission, especially that they can now amend and specify certain provisions and make emergency risks. And also the final slide, I think I have 10 seconds. The precautionary principle is mentioned only in the recitals. Let's get it back into the legal text so that we can use this when we want to protect our children. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's take another speaker at first, and then we will raise questions, and you will get some time to respond. So next speaker will be Mr. Christian Wettenberg from the European Committee for Standardization and the European Electrotechnical Committee for Standardization. The floor is yours, please.
Thank you very much, and thanks for inviting me. So I'm here in my capacity as chairman of the technical committee that is responsible for the European standards for toy safety. I'm employed by the LEGO Group, where I head up our Department for Product Safety and Compliance. Next slide, please. Just showing shortly what CEN and CENELEC are. So together with ETSI, those are the three officially recognized so-called ESOs, and they have 34 members, so another 7 countries in addition to the European member states. Next slide, please. I also wanted to explain what a harmonized standard is. That is a standard which is developed by one of these 3 ESOs, for example, CEN, CENELEC, under a mandate or a request from the European Commission. And in the process, all stakeholders are welcome to find consensus and then publish the standard. Once it's published, it's sent to the European Commission with a request to have a reference published. And when the reference is published, the standard gives a presumption of conformity to the relevant CE marking directive, in this case, toys. So it's a wonderful tool which gives access to the internal market. Next slide, please. And a little bit of history. It's over 40 years ago since we published the first standard, and they have been kept updated to be state-of-the-art over the years, considering new findings, new science, new directives, etc. Next slide, please. These are the standards that are presently in place. So it's 14 standards altogether, and there are a few in the making. And you can click once more, because I think that will mark, yes, the 3 first standards. So they are applicable to all toys, while as the other standards will be applicable for the particular type of toy. So if you produce finger paints, you need to consider that standard in addition to the first 3. So a very broad range of standards. Next slide, please. Now, there are 3 items that I think are relevant from a standardization point of view. One is the common specifications, another one is the digital product passport, and the third one are the technical changes, because all these might require involvement from standardization. The first one, common specifications, is not something that CEN and CENELEC are too happy about, because we do consider that standardization should be the primary route for harmonized technical specifications. Now, if, anyhow, the common specifications are introduced, they should be introduced in a horizontal manner. We can today see that the texts are slightly different in different pieces of regulations or proposals, and we would recommend to use the machinery regulation as a blueprint to ensure that it's applied in the same manner and only used as a fallback solution. Next slide, please. The other one is the digital product passport. And this is currently a work stream in the high-level forum for European standardization. And we do believe that an important step is to create the standards that will enable manufacturers to implement the digital product passport in a harmonized way across different regulations. So here we really just conclude that CEN/CENELEC is ready to supply those standards. We have already received a first draft standardization request from the Commission, and I think a second version is on its way, so that the work can then get started. And then, next slide, please. If we go to the technical parts, so there have been changes made to the particular safety requirements and also to other sections, which will probably need to be addressed in standards. The first one would be the fact that warnings can now, the word warning, can be replaced with a symbol. That will save packaging from having the word warning translated into the 23 EU languages. But of course, the symbol needs to be regulated in the details in a standard. When it comes to mechanical hazards, we can see from the wording that there might be a need to expand the sound pressure level requirements that are presently in place to cover also toys that haven't been designed to emit sound, but that do emit sound. Microbiological risks are called out specifically in the new draft proposal or draft regulation. And this is actually something that we have already started work on under an other standardization request from the Commission. So that's in the making. And we can go to the next slide. And then we come to the more difficult part. So as we've heard, one of the main changes is indeed the new chemical requirements, where we go from having certain limit values to relate to a complete ban of a couple of thousand substances. And it's difficult right here and now to assess the need and also the feasibility to create standards that will support this requirement. Because typically a test method would be supporting compliance with a limit value. But when there is no limit value, it becomes a bit more difficult. So we can see that this will, of course, be dependent on what will be covered in the standardization request from the European Commission. But depending on the scope of that, this might be a very large or a very time-consuming task. So I think we are not sure what this means yet, but it could well have a big effect on standardization. There is a mentioning of the need to protect the psychological and mental health of children, and we are not sure whether that might require standards to support how you can show compliance with the requirement. And then there are a few detailed wordings where there might be small editorial changes which will in the end decide whether or not there is a need for standards. A few examples would be that we today have to protect children from harmful electrical shocks. The text presently says in the new regulation that we need to protect them from electrical shocks. Also those that are not harmful. That, of course, would be a challenge. It appears that all warnings will need to be visible at the point of purchase, while as today only the warnings that would decide the consumer's decision to buy the toy. It also seems that the CE mark has to be adjacent to the warnings, but these are things that we think might just be a matter of how they're worded. But once we know, then we will also be able to define if standardization will be needed. Next slide, please. So just to summarize, Sense and Elec would like to see that standardization is the primary route to create these harmonized technical specifications, referring to the success over the 30 years that we've had, or 40 actually, we've had the toy safety standards. We foresee a good and close collaboration with the Commission and with other stakeholders in this work, ready to embrace the future, for example, the digital product passport. And then we need to consider, once we know more about what is required by the standardization process, is the transitional period sufficient to take that into consideration? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next, I would like to ask Mr. Hans Ingels from the European Commission to take the floor. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you also to the honourable members for having organised this hearing. The Commission proposal on the new toy safety regulation is an evolution, it's not a revolution. Next slide, please, because what we tried to do is to revise the toy safety rules in a specific political context. First of all, this proposal is a follow-up of the EP report that the Parliament adopted on the implementation of the directive, and which called for the revision of the directive. But it's also a follow-up of the Chemical Strategy for Sustainability, where the Commission also committed itself to strengthen the requirements on chemicals in consumer products. This proposal is also not coming in isolation. It's coming together with the revision of the CLP regulation, the revision of the REACH regulation, which will be tabled by the Commission during the coming months. And it also takes into account the ongoing discussions between Council and Parliament on the Eco-Design for Sustainable Products regulation. Next slide, please. So we have revised this, the current directive, we transformed it in a regulation as a consequence of the evaluation of the directive, which found that most elements of the directive are still valid. The directive was an efficient tool to ensure the safety of children and to ensure the single market for toys. But there were some shortcomings in the current rules on toys. First of all, being that the directive doesn't sufficiently protect from all harmful chemicals, and especially endocrine disruptors and most harmful substances. The derogations to the general bans were far too broad, and it was necessary to set new chemical limit values for toys for children to be put in the mouth. The evaluation also found new risks on data and cybersecurity that could not be tackled, and also found, as we all know, that there are many non-compliant toys on the single market. This proposal also takes into account the fitness check on chemicals legislation that the Commission published in July 2019. And this was sufficient materials for us to start revising the directive and transform it into regulation. Next slide, please. So this proposal is an evolution, it's not a revolution. So what we've tried to do is to keep what's functioning. So a number of elements are almost identical as in the Toy Safety Directive, but we've also made a number of important changes. First one is the broader concept of safety that we introduced, where toys must not jeopardize health and safety, but that will also cover psychological well-being and cognitive development. This is an important novelty in this proposal. So it's part of the general safety requirement. Also, in the specific safety requirements, we made a number of important changes. There are not many changes in the specific safety requirements on physical flammability and electrical properties and so on. The most important changes are on the chemical properties, because we do believe that it's important to protect children against the risks of the most harmful substances, especially endocrine disruptors. There have been many debates in this Parliament on endocrine disrupting chemicals. Here, the Commission takes action against the endocrine disrupting substances by banning them from the use in toys. Next slide, please. So the most harmful substances will be preventively banned in toys. So this proposal includes a generic ban on the hazardous properties of a substance. So it bans CMRs, but that's already known. But we also intend to ban, under this proposal, the endocrine disruptors, respiratory sensitizers, and substances toxic to a specific organ. The logic always being that children are the most vulnerable creatures on this planet, and that we need to protect them much more than we currently do. And that most harmful substances should not be used in toys unless there is a scientific assessment done by ECHA that would grant a derogation in limited circumstances. Other specific chemicals for chemicals, so we allow adaptation to the toy safety rules to emerging knowledge of chemical substances. And we impose new limits for substances on any toy following a specific assessment based on exposure and uses. And this proposal would then also grant the possibility for the Commission to introduce additional restrictions for other chemicals in toys when pursuant to a specific assessment they are deemed to be unsafe. Next slide. So this is the essential safety elements that we try to do for protecting children. There are a number of things that we also will not do, so I have a few minutes, because the Parliament also asked for other amendments, for instance, on cybersecurity. But as we all know, there's already, between the report and between the evaluation and the proposal, there's been other legislation being adopted in parallel. And we didn't consider it necessary, we even consider it superfluous to repeat legislation that was adopted elsewhere. So this proposal that also takes into account the evolution of the European legislation since the evaluation was tabled and since the report of the Parliament was tabled. So ensuring the protection of children is one of the two main objectives of this proposal. We look very much forward to working together with this committee and with the European Parliament on ensuring that we still keep a high level of ambition for protecting children. And in my second intervention, I'll talk a bit more on single market enforcement and level playing field for businesses. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Ja, Herr Vorsitzender, liebe Kolleginnen und Kollegen, sehr geehrte.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, panelists. I'm delighted that we're talking about toy safety in this hearing this afternoon. As rapporteur for this subject, it's of particular importance to me that we make this exchange possible because we benefit from the experience of the panelists, and the expertise of the panelists is worth its weight in gold. You've all said it's about health and protection of vulnerable children. This is a top priority, ensuring their health. So I would like to start by thanking the Commission for the new proposal where the Toys Directive is transformed into a regulation. That's what the Parliament wanted. So that is a good starting point, and it was stressed in the opinion that that is felt to be important. That alone will increase toy safety because a union-wide, unified application will be ensured, and harmonisation of legislation. And also, if you compare the EU to other international areas, toys are still quite high up the list of products that are registered as being unsafe in the single market, particularly toys from outside the EU, particularly through online trade, toys that land pretty much directly in the children's bedrooms from outside the EU. So it would be important to address that. And my questions are particularly for Mr. Wettenberg from Senelec and Sen. It's about the Commission's proposal and your views of it, and the product passport issue that you talked about. What kind of information do you think could be contained within that passport? What information would be necessary? Because we hear from manufacturers that having to put too much information in the passport can lead to falsification. So we don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. And then there's the problem of mental health. You briefly mentioned this, and I'd like to hear what you think about that, because it's something that is not legally defined. So what kind of standards did you have in mind there? And also, we've just been dealing with the packaging files in other committees, and the packaging industry are telling us that a lot of the information is not useful or superfluous. So we have a conflict of interest. So the question is, what is necessary? What needs to be stated on the packaging, and what needs to be stated on the toy itself, and what needs to be included in the list of instructions in the packaging. And then you also talked about compatibility with other proposed pieces of legislation. This is probably very important. The DSA, product safety, cybersecurity rules, they all need to be aligned. So perhaps you could say something on that.
Thank you very much. Next, I would like to ask Christel Schaldemose from S&T Group to take the floor. Please.
Thank you very much, Chair, and I will speak in Danish because I have Danish translation today, so thanks. Tak for gode præsentationer fra jer alle sammen.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the good presentations about this regulation. Toys is one of the things that we have evaluated year after year, so we can protect our children. That's very important. So my praise to the Commission, because I think this is a really good point of departure to be able to protect our children even better. I do have a couple of questions which will tie in nicely with other panel participants' questions, because Klaus Jansen says that the precautionary principle is only there in the recital. Why? We have always wanted it to be part of the legislative text because it is something that shows what we want, where legislation might be slightly ambiguous. So we want to make it quite clear that producers have thought about the precautionary principle from the beginning. So maybe the Commission could tell me why it's not there from the very beginning. And then there's the preoccupation from industry on the other side, who say that it's difficult to combine this with the rules in the chemical area. It can be difficult to avoid any trace of a chemical, so they would like to rewrite parts of the legislation to get a more precise wording. Is that a real concern? And what could we do so we don't expose our children to more chemicals? But let me repeat, I'm really happy with this point of departure. I'm happy that we are focusing on endocrine disruptors and chemicals. And finally, about mental health. I think it's really good that we think about it here. We do in other legislation like the Digital Services Act. But how would we define it? I would like to hear what the Commission says about that. But I think it's a really good idea. Don't understand me wrong. How can we do it, though? So I look forward to working with this in Parliament in the final months we have. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next, I would like to ask Katrin Lange-Siepen to take the floor, please.
Yeah, thanks. I will speak in English, and I've two topics to the Commission. Thanks for the presentation. On when it comes to the IA Act and children with disabilities, so two groups. When we have the toy safety regulation does not regulate digital aspects concerning toys, and therefore it does not deal with cybersecurity, data protection or privacy of connected toys. In the Commission's view, such risks are addressed in relevant legislation such as the IA Act and Radio Equipment Directive. However, the inclusion of toys in the IA Act will depend on the definition of the AI system, which is still under negotiation, as you know, and as well as the qualification of toys as high-risk products. Under the current text of the IA Act, not all toys will be considered high risks, but only toys that undergo third-party confirmation assessment. So it's a very detailed question, so just a few of them. That means that only certain toys would be classified as high risk, thereby ensuring more protection to kids, while others would not. This would be conceptually overlooked. Toys are a particular problematic category as a whole, since they are used by a vulnerable group, kids under 14, and are on the top list the most modified unsafe and non-compliant products in the safety gate. We would like to know from you, dear Commission and the stakeholders in the panel, what do you think about this major loophole, which would be very difficult to address, from my view, in the negotiation, the IA negotiation. And second part, additionally, we notice that the adaptive toys for children with disabilities have no place in that proposal, despite having been brought up as an important point in the INI report. I'm the shadow rapporteur for the Greens here. Adaptive toys allow children with disabilities the opportunity to have experience and access. And may I ask here the Commission why provisions for adaptive toys have not been included in the proposal for toy safety regulation? Thanks for your attention and looking forward for your answer. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next, I would like to ask Anne-Sophie Pelletier to take the floor, please.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président, et merci à la Commission pour cette...
Thank you. And thank you for these explanations. Now, toys are extremely important because, as we've been saying since the beginning of the meeting, these are products for our children. And could I go back to what I believe Christelle was saying about the precautionary principle? It's important that they be covered by this. Now, about the passport, the product passport, I think it's a good idea, basically, but I think that it has to be thought through in a very inclusive fashion now. Catherine was just talking about children with disabilities, but there are children who have parents with disabilities, so that passport shouldn't just be a QR code. It should really be identified with a product which can be fully used. Now, you referred to chemical properties, you referred to endocrine disruptors. These are crucial issues. We're talking about the health, not just of our children, but public health in general. I think that these products, these disruptors, have to disappear totally from toys. And let's be honest, we can see that some member states are quite simply blocking a ban on these products. And yet we cannot negotiate when talking about health. There's no compromise possible. If we allow for waivers, we'll have to be very careful indeed, because waivers, for me, are tantamount to just leaving the door open and letting dangerous products remain on the market. We simply won't be reacting. We have to regulate composition to ensure that our toys are safe and healthy. The safety and health of our children and adults. Video games and addiction, for instance, that's another issue. All of these matters should be taken into account for our future generations. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now I would like to ask our experts to take the floor. 9 minutes altogether, 3 minutes each. Who will be the first one? Mr. Christian Wettenberg, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I'll try to address the various questions, although I will stick to a standardization point of view. I think I need to highlight that the fact that there are unsafe toys on the market, which are also registered in the safety gate system, is not necessarily solved by having stricter requirements. It's a matter of making sure that those toys comply with the present toy safety standards. And that is, of course, a problem, that we see these products on the market that do not fulfill the safety standards. So I think that's a different topic. It's more about market surveillance. There was a question around alignment between different regulations, and the point I made there was to ensure that the way the common specifications are worded in the different regulations or proposal is uniform, so that it can be horizontally clear under which conditions common specifications can be used and withdrawn. When it comes to the digital product passports and what can or should be included, as far as I understand today, the requirements in the Toy Safety Directive is in a way to replace the present EU Declaration of Conformity, but also to add information on chemicals of concern. However, those are yet to be defined in the Ecodesign for Sustainable Products regulation, so we don't know exactly what requirements there are. And there's also an opening to say that in the future, additional items might be added to the digital product passport under the toy safety regulation. So I think it's still a bit in the making. When it comes to the standards that would support the digital product passports, I think it's about putting systems in place so that there is a tool for manufacturers to implement this. The present requirement is to have indeed could be a QR code, could also be other instruments, and when you scan it, you get access to the digital product passport. And that, of course, could be solved by each company, but standards could help them to find a platform to do that. There was also a question about the psychological and mental and cognitive health of children. And if you look at the other hazard categories that are addressed, so chemical, mechanical, electrical, hygiene, radioactivity hazards, flammability, they have specific or particular safety requirements linked to them, based on which standards can be developed. For the statement around psychological and mental health being, there aren't any supporting particular safety requirements, which makes it difficult today to see exactly how and if standards could be developed to support this. Thank you.
Thank you. And our next expert will be Klaus Jørgensen. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, and thank you for all the good questions. From BEUC's point of view, we're still negotiating with our members and listening to their input to finding out what they actually want to be included in our position. But as for the digital product passport, it's important for us that the information is available on the packaging, or at least in all the safety information and all the warnings, and preferably also chemicals of concern, because then the consumers can make an informed choice when in the shop, and they can be guided by NGOs that help them choose the right kinds of toys. Of course, we prefer that the chemicals are not in there at all, but as the regulation is right now, it's open up for derogations and so on. So if there are derogations, let's put them on the packaging so the consumers can see that they're actually there. And we, like I said in my presentation, the precautionary principle is key here. The children are most vulnerable, and we need to protect them as much as we can. And like I said, we are not only exposed from endocrine disruptors from toys, but also from the food we eat, from the air we breathe, from the surroundings that we have around us. And this is maybe the first legislation that really takes this into account. So we need to be very careful with our children, and the precautionary principles should definitely be in the legal text, not only in the recitals. I think it's interesting to look at the issue about children with disabilities, and also because if parents have disabilities, maybe it's not so easy to use a digital passport. And I think this is something that we have to discuss at ANIC as well. And one of the things that we've been talking about is that, is a QR code enough? Do every person on this earth have a telephone that they can scan this information? Maybe there should be something available in the store that can help consumers if they have to scan a QR code. So we need to look into how we can make this as easy as possible for consumers when they're out there. Yes, I think that's it for now.
Thank you. And now I would like to ask Hans Ingels from the European Commission to take the floor, please.
Thank you very much. Unfortunately, I only have 3 minutes. I would like to have 33 minutes, but this is unfortunately not possible. So I'll try to address as many comments as possible, possibly a bit too short. First of all, I'll take them by order. Packaging and packaging waste, we've taken in that proposal also into account, but we took the Commission proposal as a basis for our toy safety proposal. The packaging and packaging waste proposal only relates to the composition of the packaging as such and the waste streams, while what we try to cover is the warnings and the information to parents or grandparents or friends who buy toys for children. So these warnings need to be in the package, because what we want to correct is the information gap between the manufacturer who has all the information and the parents who don't necessarily have the information, but very often in an emotional moment together with the children want to buy a product, and so they need to have the full information on for whom is the product and how could it be used. And that needs to be in the packaging, because it determines the purchase decision. If you put it on the product itself, a lot of the information will get lost, because the child will already be in possession of the product. For the cognitive well-being and the mental health, there we relied on a concept that was developed by the WHO as a broader concept of safety, because we do believe that we need to consider this as on an international basis. And this is part of the general safety requirement, so that we need to act against emerging risks. And we do believe that this is an important novelty. I recognize the challenges for the standardization bodies also on how to develop this, and I think that this is something that we will all have to learn together. On purpose, we did not define it so precisely, but you will see also similar language in the General Product Safety Regulation, which was recently adopted, which we also took into account because it will partly apply here to toys. And so we didn't want to copy because this is not allowed. We also took into account the Digital Services Act, which we're also not repeating here. Same thing with the Radio Equipment Directive. There's no point in putting all the other requirements again and repeat it in this legislation. Manufacturers should ensure that the toys that they place on the market comply with all the existing rules. It's true that also for a number of issues, the negotiations with the Parliament and Council are still ongoing. For instance, on cybersecurity, and you made very valid comments about the AI Act. We're also aware, and therefore we would like to see how the negotiations with Parliament and Council will evolve and then possibly tackle any remaining issues here in the toy safety proposal. I understand also that the digital product passport is something that we will address during the second part of this session. For chemicals, there's indeed, we try to be stringent, but we also have a traces provision that allows certain traces nonetheless, because some traces are unavoidable, and we've got the provision on unavoidable traces in Annex 2. Precautionary principle is, for us, very important. And therefore, we also put it in the recital because we should read the entire text together. Recitals also have a meaning. They explain why we're doing certain things. And the precautionary principle is, in the first instance, something that needs to be applied by European legislators, by the Council, Parliament, and the Commission, because we have to apply it, and we cannot always rely on businesses to apply and to be familiar with the precautionary principle, and we try to do this in the proposal. I try to conclude. And then there's a final statement is also, I've heard that toys are problematic as a whole. It's not entirely correct, and we should cover this too in the general session. It's true that there are many non-compliant toys on the market. That doesn't mean that toys as such as a category is a problem, or that there's a fundamental problem with the toys rules. The fundamental problem, and this is something that we should discuss afterwards, is that a number of people, a number of businesses are not applying the rules. And this is a major problem. It's a major problem for all of us, and in the first instance for the children. If we allow that unsafe toys are being placed on the market, toys that do not comply with the rules, then it's time to take action. And I hope that we can have a good discussion here on this during the second session. Sorry for everything. Yeah,
thank you very much. I would like to thank all the speakers who took the floor in our first panel, and now we can continue with our second panel. And I would like to ask Ms. Catherine van Greest, Director General from Toy Industries of Europe, to take the floor. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon. Thank you for having me here. At TIE, Toy Industries of Europe, we represent those toy makers who really care about the safety of their toys. So, of course, we're keen to contribute to the debate so that toys will indeed be safe, but also fun and affordable. One of the main purposes of the regulation is to ensure that there are no obstacles to the free movement. We welcome this very much. Free movement of toys is very important for us. And in the past, we did have sometimes obstacles because of different interpretations by different national authorities. And I have to give credit and thanks here to the European Commission and especially to DG GROW, because they then usually would smooth over those differences. And that's why also we welcome the change from a directive into a regulation, because it will make all of this much easier. The proposal should also lead to a greater level of safety, as well as legal certainty and a level playing field for industry. Here, I have to say we have some concerns. We fear that a number of elements in the proposal will not provide us with legal certainty and most certainly not level out the playing field. I would like to add that we have not seen toys that comply with the current TSD, which really pose a safety risk. I'd like to explain some things about toys and about manufacturing in the toy market so that you may better understand our fears. I have an example of a characteristic of the toy market. This is a real safe toy made by a reputable manufacturer. This is the unsafe version of it. There are a lot of unsafe toys about. No one disagrees about this. And unsafe toys have nothing to do with reputable companies. They are made by toy companies who have no intention of playing by the rules. Their toys do not comply with the current directive, and they will not comply with the new regulation. And that is the field in which we play and which needs to be leveled out. Another characteristic is that we are a relatively small sector. So to our suppliers, we are really small fish. And if the materials for our toys need to be more pure than those for other consumer products, they will either need to provide us with alternatives or they will need to do more testing to guarantee the purity. Demand for this will not be high enough if it remains just toy specific. It will only be interesting if they can charge a big extra cost. Now, I was thinking of an example. We have a small member, who used to sell napkins like these in a box with paints so that children can decorate them. And when the TSD rules came into force, none of his suppliers were willing to provide proof that the napkin was safe when it was a toy. And it would have been, as a small company, it would have been too costly for them to do the testing themselves, so they had to discontinue the product. It feels to us that it will become even more difficult to sell safe toys instead of it becoming difficult to sell unsafe toys. You also have to ask yourself, if it's so difficult for toy makers to prove that their products are safe, what will it be like for market surveillance who have to check if this is all true? Will they really have the resources for this? And of course, we understand that we have to jump higher, we have to do better than many other sectors exactly because of who we are. But quite a few elements in the proposal will not make the toy safer. They may make it greener, and we also want greener toys, but then we need to be part of a bigger demand. Otherwise, our toys will either disappear or become too expensive, while the crap, unsafe versions of them continue to exist. So really, greening toys should be handled through horizontal legislation. Just to give one example, we agree with the ban on endocrine disruptors that are dangerous for human health, but a ban on endocrine disruptors that are not good for the environment needs to be dealt with through horizontal legislation. Now, like many other sectors, a lot of our products are also sold online. Unfortunately, a large proportion of toys sold online are sold by those people I mentioned earlier, the ones who have no intention to follow the rules. I think everyone agrees this, and the Commission proposes the digital product passport to tackle this. We're also counting on the DSA, the customs regulation, and the general product safety regulation to tackle some of the problems. But there is one remaining blind spot. None of those pieces of legislation can really do anything about, and that's the tsunami of toys that come from non-EU operators and where no one else in the EU has any responsibility. We would really like to see the regulation recognize the channels that make those sales possible as importers. It sounds like a very big ask, but it's the only way that it can be meaningfully addressed. The volume is too big to bet on market surveillance solving it. We need prevention. I just mentioned the DPP. To be very honest, we have a lot of questions still about it and how it will work exactly. But one thing we do know is it will not be the miracle cure that will fight unsafe toys on the market. If you can fake a toy, you can fake a toy passport. And even those without a passport will for the most go unnoticed, especially if they're sold through online platforms that carry no responsibility of checking anything. The final point I want to raise is the timing. It takes a minimum of 18 months to bring a new idea, from an idea to a toy on the market. The proposal has a 30-month transition period. I know 30 months sounds like a lot, but subtract 18 months and we only have 1 year left. We fear that will not be enough, especially seeing as the digital product passport still has a lot that needs to be decided. The work on the standards that we will need to apply the regulation can only start once the regulation has been adopted. Any exemption requests for the safe use of some substances will need to be launched and then will take probably a minimum of a year. So really we are going to need a lot more time. Another point in terms of time is that the proposal says that once the regulation has been in force for 12 months, all toys that comply with the old rules will need to be taken off the market. In practice, that means that we will have to destroy these toys. This makes absolutely no sense, not from a safety point of view, and definitely not from a sustainability point of view. So we really are asking for a much longer period and for those older toys, so compliant toys, to be able to remain on the market. I think in summary, I would like to ask you, the European Parliament, to ensure that it becomes easier to sell safe toys and more difficult to sell unsafe toys. And if the new regulation accomplishes that, I think both consumers and businesses alike will be very happy. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Next, I would like to ask Ms. Florence Punzano to take the floor, and she is representing BEUC, the European Consumer Organization. Please.
Thank you, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm definitely delighted to be here and to be sharing BEUC's perspective on the toy safety regulation. To start with, and we can immediately go to the next slide, please, I wanted to stress that we really welcome the proposal that has been published by the European Commission, because from a preliminary analysis, we really believe that it rightly addresses the problem of children exposure to dangerous chemicals, and it has also the potential to address many of the concerns that were raised during the REFIT evaluation, but also many of the recommendations that were included in the initiative report of the European Parliament. So in this context, we really call for a swift adoption of the position of the European Parliament and of the Council, because at least in our perspective, there are only minor aspects that needs to be improved. Now, if we move on to the next slide, please, before sharing more of our recommendations in order to strengthen the single market, I wanted to illustrate what are our concerns from a consumer perspective. And to do so, I'll use one figure, one example, and one little story. So the figure of 318 is the number of alerts about dangerous toys that have been already made by market surveillance authorities since the beginning of this year. That's quite a big number, considering also that it's probably only the tip of the iceberg. What you see in the middle of the slide is actually an example of a toy that was removed from the market and for which an alert was placed in February. And at least until yesterday, this was still available online on platforms like Amazon without any warning about the risks or the problems that this caused in the past. And the little story is actually about a research that our Dutch colleagues, Consumentenbond, conducted this summer. They started a fake dropshipping website, and then they started to buy on AliExpress products, including toys, that they had previously identified on the safety gate. And with a couple of simple tricks, they were able to circumvent all the verification mechanisms and procedures on platforms like Amazon again and Bol.com, and to sell these products to consumers. So just to say that we are highly concerned by the very big number of non-compliant and dangerous toys that are still available on the market. And moving to the next slide, please. In order to address this issue, the Toy Safety Regulation proposes to, mainly tackle this issue through the introduction of a digital product passport. On this, we believe in theory that it's a good development because it will certainly help the authorities to check product or compliance information in a more, let's say, systematic or immediate way. However, how the tool will function in practice, how it will be implemented remains to be seen. And in this context, we really call for safeguards to be ensured against the fact, for example, that the information could be incorrect or outdated or even fake. What we consider important in this context is also to make sure that on top of the documents checks, there are also enough product checks because we don't consider this to be the same. And consequently, the resources of national market surveillance authorities should be increased, not only the human resources, but also from a financial and technical point of view, in order for them to use the DPP, but also to perform more checks on products. Last point on the DPP, and this has already been mentioned in this hearing, we believe that the access to the DPP should be free for consumers and also easy. And that also the processing of personal data should be strictly limited to what is necessary to provide information to consumers. Now, what we are afraid of, and we can move to the next slide, please. We fear that the DPP won't be enough to tackle the problems of online sales. And here we will come with exactly the same recommendations that we voiced during the negotiations on the Digital Services Act and the General Product Safety Regulation, meaning that we should make sure to define online marketplaces as economic operators, that they should require to comply with more obligations, and that there should also be a possibility to hold them liable in case there is no other economic operator in the supply chain that can be identified or that can take appropriate action. Last slide, please. We have also more recommendations to further strengthen the single market and altogether the enforcement of legislation and the level of consumer protection. I'll maybe skip the first 3 points because they have been mentioned by the speakers of the first panel, but I would like to insist on the fact that for what concerns smart toys, so toys that can connect to the internet or that includes artificial intelligence, we consider it important to require third-party certification. Otherwise, we risk a major loophole considering what's being negotiated currently in the Cyber Resilience Act and the Act for the Artificial Intelligence Act. What we also consider important from a single market and legislation enforcement perspective is to include more specific criteria for the legibility and visibility of warnings, and to make sure not to confuse consumers with different pictograms. Because as far as we see in the text, there is this possibility for manufacturers to use different ones, while we will require here to be clear and to have a standardized pictogram. Still in a view not to confuse consumers, we advise to relegate the CE marking to the technical file. And we also believe that this revision is an occasion to create a legal basis for the creation of a European database on accidents and injuries. On the transitional period, I think here we disagree with TIE. It's not a surprise, but we would like to see this significantly reduced. To conclude, I wanted to say that in order for this proposal to be a success, it will also need to be backed by an ambitious reform of the EU customs. Thank you.
Thank you. And once again, I would like to ask Hans Ingels to take the floor, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Just waiting for my... We can already move to the next slide. So as we all know, and I think we all agree, that there are too many non-compliant products, non-compliant toys on the market. The EU is flooded with non-compliant toys, which means that there are toys that do not comply with the current rules and which have been found by market surveillance authorities. It's on top of the categories on the safety gate, and if you look at the data from the market surveillance authorities, 43% of the toys subject to in-depth investigations by market surveillance authorities are non-compliant. So there's an enormous problem of businesses not applying the rules at the moment. This is a risk for everybody. First instance, it's a risk for children because they are exposed to products which contain dangerous chemicals, which also have other risks that we should not underestimate, especially choking risks. If you look at the RAPICS at the safety gate, you see that there are a number of risks which are not covered. But also a problem for European industry because it endangers the competitiveness of all those businesses, and especially the SMEs, which do their utmost to comply with the rules, to respect the rules, to apply the rules. And these rules are not easy because we have a high protection of high level of protection for children. Nonetheless, they do the efforts, and a number of people don't do the efforts. They make the easy profits, easy gains. They get a lot of money, and they put the risk to our children, to our grandchildren. And this is something that we should all avoid. I don't think that there can be any discussion about this. Now the question is how. Next slide, please. We have taken into account the existing tools, which have been extensively discussed here. In the first instance, there's a market surveillance regulation, but there's also the Digital Services Act, which has been discussed many times in this committee, and then also the General Product Safety Regulation. As you know, and it's explained in the recital 6, there's also an entire several provisions on online sales in General Product Safety Regulation that also apply to toys. So therefore, again, we should not reinvent the wheel. It already exists. It already applies. We explained it in recital 6, and we should not re-include it again in the toy safety proposal. We're not going to reopen the Digital Services Act or General Product Safety Regulation. We respect the decision of the legislator, and we want to hear specific rules on toys. We think that most of the non-compliant toys come from outside the EU. Therefore, we would like to rely on something totally new, because we all know that we need more market surveillance, we all know that we need more customs controls. Therefore, what we'd like to do is to rely on something which is totally new, is a connection of the digital product passport with customs. In other words, there should be automated controls at the external borders. We replace the current declaration of conformity by the digital product passport. One in, one out. On the basis of the digital product passport, which is modeled on the basis of the Eco-Design for Sustainable Products regulation, which we will also see reappearing in other Commission proposals. There's a link with the data carrier that is fixed to the toy, which contains the compliance information which is directly accessible to market surveillance and customs authorities. So toys that will be placed on the EU market need to be registered in a registry. And then there will be automated controls to software at customs. Now, if you look at customs nowadays, the system of verification is fairly simple, fairly primitive, and relies also on the customs authorities. And if they're handling a container with drugs, for instance, and a container with toys, you can imagine which one will get priority. So here, what we like to do is through customs control, because everybody who imports a toy into the EU must fill out the customs declaration. And there's a reform of the customs code already ongoing. We've got specific legislation on automated customs control, and we would like to put it all together. It's new, it's revolutionary, but we do think that it will do the trick. Again, new provisions, or the same provisions as GPR, including in the toy safety proposal, repeating what already been adopted by this committee a while ago, for us, don't add any value. What we need to do is protect children. What we need to do is also ensure a fair internal market for toy manufacturers and especially for SMEs. And we do think that the digital product passport will be the primary tool for doing this. We would be more optimistic than our colleagues from the toys industry on this, because if this is up and running, we do believe that it will make a difference. And it will also frighten a lot of people who are being outside the EU to sell their products in the EU, because they will see that they have to fill this out in the customs declaration. They will have to do much more work to put these products on the market. Next slide, please. This goes hand in hand with stronger market surveillance. And as you know, this market surveillance regulation also, was adopted in 2019. So market surveillance authorities should check toys on the market. There's a safeguard clause procedure where the Commission can decide in case of disagreement between market surveillance authorities, because market surveillance authorities can disagree on a specific product, and that's up to the Commission to decide. But also a novelty is that the Commission now itself has the possibility, according to the proposal, to take measures against toys that present a risk, which is also something totally new, which would allow us ex officio to intervene if we think that there's a problem with the non-compliant toy. Finally, also, we should not forget that Article 4 of the market surveillance regulation also specifically applies to toys and obliges to have a responsible person in the EU for toys, which allows us to pass to the next slide, which was... So, all in all, we do believe that all these provisions strengthen the enforcement of the toy safety rules, that these provisions will make a big difference. Especially, we have strong confidence that the digital product passport and automated customs control will solve many problems, will not solve all problems, but we also do not believe there's any system in this world that cannot be falsified. But we do think that if you put, if you try to be as severe as possible, we can solve the problem of non-compliant products together. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now we have time for questions. And once again, Mario Bolschmann, please. Just 1 minute.
Ja, sehr verehrte Kolleginnen und Kollegen.
Thank you, colleagues. You emphasize in the second panel of the hearing that our goal is the highest standard of protection for children, and that was underlined, and the free and to strengthen the free movement of toys in the EU. And we talk about the toy industry, then we should all be clear that 99% of firms in this sector are SMEs. And the majority of those businesses are, in fact, very small. Now, this aspect shouldn't be lost sight of when we come to propose rules. And I want to get something off my chest here, because you mentioned a figure about who is this 43% of unsafe products that are toys, and of those, most of those come from third countries. So the aid for SMEs to help them cope with the administrative burden and to be able to produce these products, to have enough of them in the internal market, then we'll have these third country producers who are circumventing our rules, selling their products in the internal market, and they'll be squeezing producers from the internal market out of the market. So I think we have to think very hard about how we're going to carry out controls and ensure that we foil those who are far away and who have no concerns about selling dangerous products, which local producers wouldn't dare to do. So we have to think about market surveillance and the necessary personnel. We have to talk about boosting the human resources, which is, of course, a matter for the member states. And in terms of product safety, we had to call on member states to do the necessary in their own interest, to provide the necessary resources, because it's no secret that in some ports, a lot of controls are carried out on containers, and others none at all now. And we must make it difficult to circumvent the rules, or else there'll be no deterrent effect. So that is a point that I believe that we need a system where the rules are supervised, enforced, or else it'll be worth nothing. So I would like to thank all the members of the panel, and I think during the processing of the dossier, we'll be coming back to some of them.
To take the floor, please.
Thank you, Chair. From a first reading of the proposal, I'm glad to notice several positive elements which are responding to the Parliament's report of February 2022, on which we worked together with many colleagues. And it seems that it's trying to solve some of the main concerns about the current directive. I have several considerations, but I will limit myself, obviously for time constraints, to a couple of questions. First of all, one of the shortcomings of the directive was on the enforcement side, as it only contained a general obligation to the Member States to perform market surveillance. When we approved the Parliament report on the implementation of the directive, the market surveillance regulation had just started to apply. Now it has been 2 years, and I would like to ask the Commission whether in their assessment they see an improvement in market surveillance activities, and in particular in the coordination and exchange among Member States. This also leads me to a second consideration and question, this time to the representative of BEUC. The addition of the digital product passport seems a valuable one, but only for its clear reference to sustainability, not only for that, but also for the key role it might have to ensure a swift enforcement of the regulation in customs checks. However, I've noticed that this role has come to the expense of a strengthened third-party conformity assessment, which seemed to enjoy a rather positive assessment in the explanatory statement, and which was for many, including my political group, a clear need for such a sensitive class of products. Is the role of the digital product passport enough, in your opinion, to guarantee that only safe toys will circulate in the EU market? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next, I would like to ask Vlad Poptus to take the floor, please.
Thank you, Chair. I want to thank our guests for taking their time for this debate and for sharing their perspective on the single market for toys. I understand that this sector is evolving and changing along with the request for modern toys, for interactive toys, but I also know that the European manufacturers of toys are mostly small and micro enterprises, which makes it quite difficult for them to keep up with the change of the legislation at European level in different sectors that are affecting their work, like the chemicals, the software, the cybersecurity, to name just a few. Still, there is still a request traditional toys for traditional materials for simplicity. I would like to understand from the industry representatives what are the main impediments for the micro and small companies become truly European economic actors to manufacture their toys in one country and sell them all over the European Union. What should we do, change for an artisan toy producer from Finland to be able to easily sell his toys in Spain or any other countries? Thank you.
Thank you, Vlad. Next, I would like to ask Anne-Sophie Pelletier to take the floor, please.
Merci, Monsieur le Président, et encore aussi merci à nos experts.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you to the experts. I agree with what BEUC has said. It's the responsibility of the platforms and the manufacturers, and I think that is the angle that we should be seeing this subject from. We were talking about databases on accidents before. It was the left that was calling for that in the past, and I believe that would give us a better snapshot of the dangerous nature of some of these products. And finally, here again, I agree. When the customs code is reviewed in the near future, if we don't want a product to get in, the first gate is customs. So what we need is not just a digital passport. We need people, the customs officers. We say that we want to digitalise everything, but what we really need is real people on the ground, boots on the ground. We need these customs agents. They are the ones that can stop these products from getting in, because there are limits to digital tools. So for this to work, and I hope this will be in the code, it's a question more for the Commission, but I hope that you're going to put more customs boots on the ground. That's the way to stop these products getting in.
Thank you. And now I would like to ask Morten Løkkegaard to take the floor, please.
Thank you, and I will address you in Danish, just to warn you. Jeg skal starte med at undskylde, jeg ikke har været.
First of all, let me apologize for coming in late. I don't know if this question has been asked before, so there's a danger that I repeat something, but I'll just ask anyway. My group is of course happy that we now have a regulation instead of a directive. That's what I wanted to say first. There are many good ideas in the new proposal, but does that really handle the obstacle before us? Producers have now asked how we handle third countries. So that's my question to the Commission. I apologize if I repeat a question that's been said. If we have the challenge here that third countries are skewing competition because they don't live up to the rules, I don't think that the proposal, even with the regulation here, gives us a complete answer. The Commission said that we won't be able to avoid anyone scamming, but do you think this is not a very big challenge in importers' responsibility?
And time to give some answers. Who wants to be the first one? Yes, please. Mr. Hans Ingels, please.
Thank you very much, and thank you also for your general support for the proposal. We focus very much here on enforcement, and rightly so, because enforcement is a very important item. We do believe that software will add a lot of value. As we all know in our daily lives, all the new IT systems very much help us. And help us to become more efficient, to help us to become more productive. And we do believe, and we do deeply believe, that the digital product passport will make a difference. There will probably never be a proposal which covers so much enforcement and market surveillance as this one. And we try to cover everything, and without repeating what's already done in the Digital Services Act or without repeating what in the General Product Safety Regulation. If you look into the impact assessment, you will see that we try to assess the efficiency gains also for market surveillance authorities and customs authorities. If the digital product passport would be operational, and if then we go to the EU customs single window system, the two things would be connected, then automatically there would be efficiency gains for market surveillance authorities. In other words, there would be efficiency gains that would vary between 10 and 20%. In other words, all the time that market surveillance authorities and customs officers now spend on controls, and very often very primitive controls, they could then easily spend on other controls and more substantive controls on products entering the market, because the software itself will already identify problems and importers that usually do not comply with the products or with the rules, or products that do not comply with the rules. It will be an additional hurdle for products entering the EU that do not comply with the rules. And for us, we do believe, after thorough impact assessment, because we've been consulting everybody on possible miracle solutions, but there are no miracle solutions. So we have to rely on a number of existing systems. We do believe that the digital product passport is a novelty that will make a difference. There was also a question on our experience with the market surveillance authorities. We've seen also a major difference in practice. Since the market surveillance regulation started applying, there have been many more market surveillance activities, and they're also much more coordinated. Because one of the troubles in Europe with market surveillance is that all market surveillance authorities in the past used to work on an island. Now there's a network in which they coordinate. There's also more support by the single market program. There are stronger rules in working together. There are certain presumptions. If a product is found unsafe in one member state, then it will be unsafe in another member state. So the market surveillance regulation as such makes a difference. The Commission is now working on the evaluation of the functioning of Article 4, which is a specific provision which obliges manufacturers, which obliges people which are not established to have a responsible person in the EU. And that evaluation will be available normally next year. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Ms. Florence Ponzano, please.
Yes, thank you. On the question whether the DPP will be enough to prevent or limit the exposure of consumers to unsafe toys, we believe that it can make a positive contribution, of course, but as I said during my statement, because the information could be outdated or could be also fake, we call for safeguards to be put in place so that what is in the DPP actually is valid information. And in this context, we think that in order to limit also the number of non-compliant toys that are available on the market, we should go for more third-party certification, again, to start with connected toys and also expand that to more toys categories. And finally, without putting more obligations on online marketplaces, we believe that there will always be an issue with the resources and the work that market surveillance authorities need to perform. So we really count on this opportunity and the revision of the Toy Safety Directive to make sure that online marketplaces can prevent ex ante products that are non-compliant not to be available online. And then maybe to react to a few comments that have been made on the fact that most of the businesses that are in the toy sector are SMEs. We firmly believe that safety should not be depending on the size of companies. Like it should not depend on the sales channels through which consumers buy their toy, whether in high street stores or online. And what can certainly help market surveillance, but also the work of standardizers is to have more data on injury and accidents that are caused by toys, but also by other products. And having a common methodology here would really help. On the fact that digitalization has limits, yes, indeed. And what a concrete illustration that we are considering here is that because the DPP will probably increase the number of alerts by customs to their national counterparts, to market surveillance authorities, there will be a challenge with the deadline that has been set in the market surveillance regulation, according to which market surveillance authorities need to react within 4 working days. So we really call for safeguards to be put in place and, of course, for more resources to better equip market surveillance authorities. Thank you.
Thank you. And now I would like to ask Ms. Catherine Van Reeth to take the floor, please.
Thank you. I'm grateful to Mrs. Walsman for mentioning that our sector does indeed consist, or our companies are 99% SMEs. I wasn't sure that I had mentioned that in my own intervention. And thank you also to the several speakers in the committee for urging the member states also to do the necessary and not to forget about human resources in market surveillance. We do think that's very important. Then with regard to the very specific question in terms of, small manufacturers being able to sell throughout Europe, we do have companies that used to be small manufacturers and that are real, European examples. Basically, we have Ravensburger, Schleich, SES Creative, Symbodike, and of course Lego also initially started as a small company. I think if you are a small manufacturer of toys in Finland and you are able to sell your toys in Finland, you should be able to sell them throughout the European Union because we have a single market. And actually, in recent times, it has not been. It's not been because of safety rules or the Toy Safety Directive that the interpretation that the single market was fragmented, but more through different national member states asking for environmental measures. I'm talking about the packaging and packaging waste measures. I know now this is being handled. But this has actually really caused for some of our members a fragmentation of their market, which is a shame. I think it's still this year, the 30th anniversary of the single market. And, we've seen it sometimes really, letting us down. But it should not be because of something in the Toy Safety Directive. I hope that answers the question. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I would like to cordially thank all our panelists and all the speakers, and I would like to inform the members of our IMCO committee that your presentations will be published on official IMCO websites with your consent, of course. And once again, thank you very much for this useful debate. Thank you. And now I would like to ask Anna to take the floor.